Welcome to my new podcast. I'm Chad.Taylor, psychotherapist and author of It's You, Oh Fuck, It's Me. This podcast is about relationships, self-avoidance, and the shit we pretend isn't us. No tips, no fixing, just real conversations. This podcast exists because I got tired of watching people use insight instead of honesty, including myself. We live in a world where there's so much information available for insight that we almost run around using this therapy language or spiritual language or self-awareness language when we haven't done anything about the internal work ourselves. We haven't evolved one bit, most of us. We sound evolved, but nothing's really fucking changed. And that's the reason why I've written the book. It was the book that I wish I had have been given or was around for me. I didn't write it because I had relationships figured out. Fucking far from it. If anyone's read my book or listened to any of my other podcasts with Dean on conversations for conscious relationships, I definitely don't have life figured out. The reason I've written this book and have started this podcast is because once I started seeing my patterns, I couldn't really unsee them anymore, and that becomes pretty confronting. The same reason I ended up training as a psychotherapist. I used to be a tradie in a former life, which ran its course, and I enjoyed it until I didn't. You know, when the when the self-awareness stopped being growth and started being protection for me, and that was an identity of being a tradie, even making money, being a man. It was the truth was I was just scared of being alone. I think I was scared of sitting still. Whenever I kept making good money, I could keep buying things that I wanted. I could keep, buying bigger houses, building houses, faster race cars, Harleys, whatever I wanted. But none of that stuff fucking filled me. Doesn't matter how much I got. In my book, at the start of chapter 2, I talk about the parable of the Mexican fisherman. It's probably good to just give you the dissected version here that, what it's really about is, it's about chasing and chasing and chasing and trying to get more and not seeing the life that we already had before that. If you haven't read it, it's the start of chapter 2 in my book, or really if you don't want to buy my book or think I'm a dickhead and don't want to listen to me even after this, if you pause this or ended this podcast right now and just went and Googled, the parable of the Mexican fisherman and meditated on that, that would be enough to change your life. What I've found is, through therapy, my own therapy with my therapist and also as a therapist, we're connecting sideways. We're always connecting sideways. It's never real intimacy. There's always a level of not being seen. We connect through sex. We connect through our screens, through work. Substances is a big way we connect. A bunch of guys meet at the pub on a Friday afternoon. I'll use guys because I am a guy and I was a tradie. Meet at the pub on Friday afternoon or a Thursday afternoon or a Saturday. It doesn't really matter what it is. And then, for the first hour or two, the conversations are pretty surface level, right? How you going? Yeah, good, mate. Good. Yeah, good. Yeah, how's things? Oh, busy. Fuck, busy, mate. Yeah, busy. Then we add in 10 beers or 6 beers or whatever it might be, a bit of substances, and then we start to connect at a deeper level. I guess the reason for this podcast is how can we start to connect at a deeper level without needing the substances or without being needed or without needing an identity or without being right. Another way we believe that we're growing is by being right and proving everyone else wrong. This false connection feels better than real connection because it's safer. Real connection means being seen. That word intimacy, into me, I see. The reason we can't have real intimacy is because we're fearful of being seen. And I think being seen ourselves, you know, seeing ourselves, I guess, is what I'm trying to say here. You know, most people will push back at this concept, because responsibility starts to sound like blame when it's not. Responsibility isn't punishing yourself for what you didn't know. It's the moment we realize that we're powerless over, the life's journey, I guess, that journey of being born and then going, coming into the world, not really understanding or being taught that, we create these identities and wear these masks, and the egocentricity forms to keep us safe, and that egocentricity hijacks us, and then we almost are the egocentricity for the rest of our lives. This is what all spiritual teachings and religious teachings and any teaching has been trying to dismantle in us, that as long as the problem is someone else, whether it's a race or a sex, or whether it's that this person does that or this person has a certain religion, therefore they're wrong and I'm right. Well, if we keep doing that, nothing changes, But when the problem becomes us, something can finally fucking change. And I guess this is going to be a short episode, and I'm going to try and keep all the episodes fairly short, not as short as this one, but really about, you know, getting people on. So moving forward, some of the episodes are just going to be me, probably the shorter ones, because it feels really fucking weird talking into a computer without anyone there. I think I'm going to find the solo ones the hardest by far because, again, it's that intimacy, right? It's only me here right now. I'm talking to a blank screen. I'm recording this on Zoom and there's a photo of me there because I don't want the video in front of me. And I'm actually using hand gestures and I'm getting into it, but it's really weird. So some of them are just going to be me, where I'll hopefully pull threads straight out of my book, out of my work, out of my own life, out of my journey. Some of the conversations are going to be with other therapists. I'm going to give them some questions to choose from and try and get them to focus on one of those questions and come on and talk about where they struggle with that or where they struggled with it in their life, not what they know and what they can teach us and cognitively what they've learned about or done a course on, about what they fucking, what they know about themselves, how it's been hard to be a therapist and then integrate this into your family life. How can you be the same person you are with your family as what you are in a therapy room, as what you are with your kids? Most therapists, if I'm truthful, it's easy to hide behind insight. It's easy for us to know or anybody to know and to hide behind that insight. And some of the other conversations are going to be with readers and clients, people either starting out doing the work or some that have been doing the work for a while and what's changing in them through doing the shadow work or through doing this deep work. No one's really coming on here to be fixed. I can't fix them. I can't fix anyone. Fuck, I struggle to fix myself. And I'm not broken, I don't need fixing. I just need some awareness to understand what the fuck's been going on in my life. I can't make anyone feel better really, as all I can do is hopefully reveal a bit of them to themselves. And nothing in this podcast is going to save you at all. The insight that I might have on certain topics isn't going to save you. The language I use isn't going to save you. The conversations aren't going to save you, really. The only thing that's going to save you is if you can start catching yourself in that moment where, like I am right here, where I'm waffling on a bit already. Catch yourself and come back to the present moment. Catch yourself when you want to blame someone. Catch yourself when you want to run away, when you want to be right. We use a lot of language in the world now. Oh, he's avoidant. She's anxious. He's this, she's that, they're this. There's a lot of labels and a lot of understanding. A lot of people will use being anxious and avoidant or finding out that they are as an excuse to be more of a fucking pain in the ass. That's not why we're here. What we're here is we're here to understand, okay, what does learning that I'm anxiously attached mean for me? Well, that means that, when I feel triggered or when I feel a little bit I suppose triggered's a good word to use. I want to get closer to my partner or to people around me to soothe me. If I'm avoidant, I want to do the opposite. This is what we're here for, to try and find out, even if it's just one little bit of insight. For me, it was really about being a victim. I wore being a victim as an identity. It was poor me all the time, and I learned that that gave me love pretty early on in my life. The worse my story was, the more love I got. And that's pretty confronting to share this with the world, right? That I lived for 35 years of my life not realizing that, I was a victim. And some of my partners, we'd almost out victim each other trying to seek love. And then when that would blow up, we would really then end up in these big fights. So I guess I've just touched on a few things right now, and I wanted to leave this as a short intro about, what it's going to be like moving forward. It's doing the work, and that's what I'll be talking about. So, you're not going to probably hear these call to actions. You're not going to hear buy my book. You're not going to hear follow and subscribe to me and all that sort of jazz, because it's not about that. I truly believe that people that come across this podcast or will end up buying my book, or, maybe they'll buy it just to prove that I'm a dickhead. I don't care. I'm not going to be that coachy, do this, do that. I really believe that people will find what's right for them. And if it's not right for them, they won't. So if you're here, I do hope you're here again. If you're here and you're not here again, well, I hope you got whatever you needed here, good or bad. And, I'll see you on the next one. The next one will be with a therapist. I've sent it out to a few of my close friends. You'll probably hear my partner Sophie on here, maybe even get my kids on here or my parents on here if they're up for it. That's what I'd like to get. People that know me, because I can sit here and tell you guys who I'd like to think I am. It's the people closest to me that will tell you who I really am. Till next time.